You pay 50 bucks to look at a tiger, and suddenly you are furious it refuses to smile for your camera. Welcome to the terrifying reality of public customer service. We tracked down 69 of the most unhinged, brain-dead, and completely absurd complaints actual adults filed at zoos and aquariums. The animals are acting perfectly normal, but humanity is definitely doomed. 1. Let us start with expectations versus reality. You drop 50 bucks on a zoo ticket expecting a real-life action movie, but the king of the jungle is just passed out under a tree. One outraged mother actually demanded a full refund because the lions were sleeping. She claimed she paid to see them roar and hunt, completely ignoring that these massive cats naturally sleep up to 20 hours a day. Her brilliant solution: she formally suggested the zoo staff should install loud sirens or hire a local marching band to walk past the enclosure every hour on the hour. Because nothing says natural habitat like an unexpected tuba solo. 2. Apparently, Mother Nature is rated or R. Customer service at a major city zoo had to keep a straight face while a deeply offended tourist lodged a formal moral objection. His horrifying discovery? The animals were walking around completely naked. He specifically targeted the baboon enclosure, stating that the bright red rear ends of the monkeys were entirely inappropriate for family viewing. This guy genuinely requested that management provide shorts, or at least some sort of modesty drape, for the primates. I am just picturing a monkey trying to figure out how to put on a pair of khaki cargo shorts so this guy can eat his churro in peace. 3. Standing perfectly still is an evolutionary survival tactic, but to one suspicious visitor at the reptile house, it was proof of a massive scam. This guy threw an absolute fit because he was convinced the giant saltwater crocodile was made of cheap plastic. Since the 1,000-pound dinosaur was just basking in the sun, he demanded a manager immediately. He literally asked customer service if they could toss a giant squeaky toy or spray the predator with a fire hose just to prove it was a real living creature. Yeah, sure thing, buddy. Let us just annoy a literal apex monster for your personal entertainment. 4. How exactly do you expect a building holding millions of gallons of water to feel? Well, one visitor left a blistering 1-star review because the indoor aquarium exhibits felt way too damp. They complained that the ambient humidity completely ruined their expensive blowout hairstyle. To make this level of entitlement even better, they also stated that the water in the shark tank was an unnatural shade of blue. They actually requested the staff change the water to a more neutral tone so it would match their social media aesthetic perfectly. Because clearly, marine biology is all about interior design. 5. Wearing shorts and a tank top to an indoor Antarctic exhibit is a choice, but taking it out on a teenaged employee is just wild. This furious guest yelled at the staff because the penguin habitat was uncomfortably chilly. They felt personally victimized by the low temperatures and strongly suggested the zoo install space heaters right near the glass. They completely ignored the tiny detail that actual emperor penguins on the other side of that glass literally rely on freezing environments to survive. Calling the thermostat setting downright hostile, they demanded a free hot chocolate for their extreme emotional and physical suffering. 6. The circle of life is apparently too brutal for a relaxing afternoon stroll. A woman filed a formal, deeply concerned grievance after watching a python swallow a rat whole at the reptile center. Her totally logical argument was that the zoo should have prepared the snake a vegan alternative, or at least cooked the meal first so it looked less like a recognizable rodent. She claimed the raw, unfiltered nature of the feeding gave her terrible vibes and ruined her entire weekend. I really want to know what kind of gourmet plant-based tofu burger she thought a 20-foot constrictor was going to eagerly eat. 7. Springtime means blooming flowers, chirping birds, and a whole lot of biological urges happening right in front of your salad. A deeply scandalized father marched up to the ticket booth, demanding the immediate separation of 2 giant mating tortoises because they were doing it right out in the open. He told management his entire weekend was ruined because he had to explain human reproduction to his teenagers way earlier than planned. His actual written suggestion was that the zoo built private little honeymoon suites for the animals to protect the innocence of the general public. Good luck telling a 400-pound reptile to get a room. 8. Who could have possibly predicted that a barn full of livestock would smell exactly like a barn full of livestock? Zoos across the country regularly get bombarded with emails from city dwellers complaining that the farm animal petting area smells way too much like poop. These people literally claim that the natural aroma of horses and goats is highly offensive to their sensitive noses. One reviewer went as far as suggesting the zoo invest in massive industrial cans of lavender air freshener to spray down the alpacas before opening the gates each morning. Because nothing says nature like a chemically scented goat. 9. Customer service expectations have officially reached the bottom of the ocean. Down at a famous marine center, a very unhappy customer complained that the fish were incredibly rude. Yes, you heard that correctly. The fish had a bad attitude. She claimed she stood by the giant kelp forest tank for 20 solid minutes waving her hands, and not a single fish stopped to look at her or interact. She felt the aquarium was doing a completely unacceptable job of training their marine life in basic hospitality skills. I guess she expected a flounder to swim up and warmly ask her how her day was going. 10. Nature is famously known for its perfectly flat, paved surfaces, right? That is what one exhausted tourist seemed to think when he realized how massive the city zoo actually was. He left a furious comment card stating that the park designers deliberately installed too many hills just to punish people who hate walking. His grand master plan was for the entire park to be completely flattened out like a shopping mall parking lot. He even suggested they cram the lions, tigers, and bears right next to the entrance gate so nobody would ever have to break a single drop of sweat just to see a wild animal. 11. Calling security over a bird is a completely new level of panic. Free-roaming peacocks are a total staple at most animal parks, but one guy saw them as an absolute top-tier security threat. He called the front desk in a sheer panic, reporting that a highly dangerous, brightly colored turkey was loose and actively stalking him near the concession stand. When he finally learned the bird was actually supposed to be walking around, he completely flipped out. He demanded the zoo put all the peacocks on short leashes because their sudden loud squawking made him drop his $9 soft pretzel right onto the concrete. 12. The entire point of a nocturnal house is to simulate nighttime so bats and owls actually wake up during visiting hours. Somehow, this incredibly simple concept completely flew over the head of one genius visitor. They complained to security that the building was dangerously dark and they could not even see their own shoes. They boldly told the staff to just turn on the overhead fluorescent lights so everyone could get a better look at the sleeping bats. They were totally oblivious to the insane irony that blasting the room with light would completely ruin the exact exhibit they just paid money to see. 13. Have you ever looked at a perfectly healthy animal and thought it was structurally defective? A highly concerned visitor filed a completely serious safety complaint stating that the giraffes looked dangerously unstable. She was genuinely terrified that their necks were way too long and might just snap right off if they bent down to drink water from the pond. Acting like a self-appointed wildlife engineer, she strongly advised the zoologist to provide the giraffes with supportive medical neck braces. If that was too expensive, she suggested building special high tables for their food so they would never have to strain themselves again. 14. Walking through an aquarium is supposed to be educational, but for one guy, it was just a massive trigger for his appetite. An aquarium gift shop manager had to deal with a visitor who felt deeply emotionally conflicted after touring the Pacific Reef exhibit. He complained that watching all those beautiful plump tuna and salmon swimming around made him fiercely crave a spicy tuna roll. He told the staff it was incredibly insensitive of them to display delicious seafood without opening a sushi bar right next to the exit. He actually felt the aquarium owed him a gift card to a local Japanese restaurant for the psychological torment. 15. Conspiracy theorists love a good mystery, and one woman was absolutely convinced she had uncovered a massive, multi-million-dollar fraud at her local zoo. She loudly proclaimed to anyone within earshot that the zebras were just regular farm horses painted with black and white stripes to save money. Even when a bewildered zookeeper tried to calmly explain natural hair patterns, she doubled down on her wild theory. She literally demanded the zoo bring out an industrial power washer right that second to prove the paint would not rinse straight off into the grass. You really cannot argue with that level of complete delusion. 16. Animated movies have done irreparable damage to our understanding of biology. A severely disappointed dad stormed right up to a zoo guide and complained that the meerkats and warthogs were not hanging out together like they do in those famous cartoon films. He claimed it was flat-out false advertising that the zoo kept them in separate habitats instead of letting them sing catchy songs and eat juicy bugs side by side. He felt completely robbed of a magical family moment and actually asked for a partial refund to compensate for the zoo failing to provide total cinematic accuracy. 17. Getting a bad vibe from a literal apex predator is just called having survival instincts, but one guest took it incredibly personally. Down at the underwater tunnel, a terrified woman filed a formal incident report because a tiger shark looked at her with malicious intent. She claimed the massive fish locked eyes with her through the thick acrylic and gave her a threatening look that made her deeply uncomfortable. She seriously requested that the aquarium staff pull the shark aside for a disciplinary chat to correct its aggressive attitude, or at least put up a curtain so it could not stare at paying customers anymore. 18. Learning new things is apparently a terrible burden for some folks. Educational signs are scattered everywhere to teach you about conservation, but one incredibly lazy visitor found that absolutely unacceptable. He left an angry 2-star review complaining that there were way too many words on the informational plaques, and it felt exactly like being trapped back in high school biology. He strongly suggested the zoo replace all the written text with quick audio buttons that just play cool animal noises. Reading a single, nicely written paragraph about a rhino was simply too much mental labor for his relaxing Saturday afternoon. 19. The silverback gorilla is one of the most majestic creatures on the planet, but one teenager was severely unimpressed with reality. He complained that the giant ape was just sitting quietly on a log, chewing on some celery, instead of beating its chest like a blockbuster movie monster. Clearly bored that the animal was not performing on command, the kid actually asked a park ranger if they could hire a professional clown to go inside the enclosure and juggle. He figured that might confuse the gorilla enough to do something viral for his social media video. 20. If you willingly sit in the first 5 rows of a marine mammal show, the massive warning signs painted in bright red letters literally guarantee you will get soaked. Despite this universally known fact, a furious woman marched into the management office completely dripping wet and demanded a fat check for her ruined designer handbag. She totally ignored the obvious splash zone warnings and argued that the highly trained dolphins should be smart enough to aim their jumps away from people who are clearly wearing expensive clothing. Because obviously, a dolphin definitely knows the exact difference between a cheap tote bag and Italian leather. 21. People genuinely do not understand how biology works. One frantic guest stormed up to the information desk to report a massive medical emergency because the 2-toed sloth was barely moving. When the guide patiently explained that sloths are famously the slowest mammals on Earth, the guest absolutely refused to accept it. They loudly demanded the veterinary team intervene immediately by slipping a massive shot of espresso into the animal's water bowl to perk it up for the paying crowd. Imagine a highly caffeinated sloth vibrating in a tree just so this guy could get his money's worth. 22. Let us talk about unrealistic beauty standards in the bird world. A wildly offended patron marched right into the manager's office to complain that the flamingo exhibit was a complete eyesore. Her issue was not the smell or the noise, but that the birds were aggressively too pink. She actually accused the zoo of secretly feeding them artificial food coloring to make the enclosure look more tropical. She suggested they switch the flock to a bland diet immediately because the bright neon feathers were totally clashing with her muted beige outfit for her family photo shoot. 23. Body positivity has officially reached the animal kingdom. But one mom was completely not having it. She wrote a scathing email to a city zoo, claiming that the hippopotamus exhibit was setting a terrible example for her young daughters. She seriously argued that showcasing such incredibly massive, lazy animals eating cabbage all day promoted an unhealthy lifestyle. Her actual demand was for the zoo to put the 3,000-pound river monsters on a strict calorie deficit and install a giant underwater treadmill so they could slim down for the summer season. 24. Nature is completely gross, and some people are entirely unprepared for it. Over at the primate habitat, a totally disgusted man filed a furious grievance after witnessing a chimpanzee scratch its backside and throw something unidentified across the grass. He felt the zoo was running a deeply unsanitary operation and demanded an immediate, ridiculous solution. He actually expected the zoologist to wrangle the entire troop of highly aggressive apes and force them to wear oversized baby diapers to keep the exhibit looking clean and sanitized for polite society. 25. Irrational fear makes people say some truly incredible things. Down at the deep-sea aquarium, a deeply terrified woman demanded a full refund because the jellyfish exhibit made her fear for her life. She was not worried about falling into the tank. Instead, she was totally convinced that the transparent floating sea creatures could somehow shoot their venom straight through 6 inches of solid acrylic glass and sting her right in the eyeball. She begged the staff to put tiny little protective nets over each individual jellyfish so she could walk down the hallway without wearing safety goggles. 26. If you want a sparkling conversation, maybe do not try to chat up a captive bird. One incredibly angry visitor left a massive rant on a review site because the blue and gold macaw completely ignored his aggressive attempts at small talk. He felt completely scammed because the parrot did not say hello, ask for a cracker, or recite pirate catchphrases like in the movies. He actually argued that the zoo should legally lower their ticket prices because none of the animals spoke fluent English, making the entire educational experience totally useless for him. 27. You would assume people go to a bird sanctuary to hear the beautiful sounds of nature, but one guy completely disagreed. He stormed into the guest relations office to officially report the kookaburras for public harassment. If you have ever heard a kookaburra, you know their call sounds exactly like loud, manic human laughter. This wildly insecure tourist was convinced the birds were intentionally mocking his bald spot. He demanded the keepers either train the birds to sing a normal melody or put up a soundproof glass wall so he would not feel ridiculed by a flock of feathered comedians. 28. Basic science is clearly not a strong suit for everyone who buys an aquarium ticket. A frantic tourist hammered on the glass of a massive coral reef tank and screamed for an employee because she thought the stingrays were actively drowning. She passionately argued that because the giant fish had not come up to the surface for a breath of fresh air in over 10 minutes, they were suffocating right in front of her eyes. The poor marine biologist on duty had to spend 20 minutes explaining the concept of gills to a fully grown adult who was threatening to call the fire department. 29. Outdoor attractions generally exist outside, which leaves them totally vulnerable to the weather. Well, one deeply angry dad completely blamed the zoo management when a sudden summer thunderstorm ruined his weekend trip. He marched into the gift shop dripping wet and demanded to know why they had not installed a massive park-wide glass dome to keep the rain off all the walking paths. He seriously believed a non-profit wildlife rescue should have the budget of a billionaire supervillain just to ensure his white sneakers stayed perfectly dry while looking at the elephants. 30. Taking a highly important business call right next to the wolf enclosure is definitely a massive mistake. A guy in a sharp business suit threw a massive temper tantrum because the Timberwolves started howling together right in the middle of his virtual conference call. He marched up to a staff member and aggressively demanded they go tell the pack of wild canines to keep their voices down. He actually threatened to sue the zoo for lost wages because the alpha male howling at a passing ambulance completely ruined a lucrative real estate deal he was trying to close. 31. Pop culture stereotypes strike again to ruin a perfectly good wildlife experience. A frustrated tourist down in the Australian Outback exhibit felt ripped off because the red kangaroos were just lounging quietly in the dirt. He loudly complained to a zookeeper that he drove 3 hours specifically to see a violent, bare-knuckle boxing match between two massive marsupials. Instead of throwing boxing gloves into the pen, he actually demanded the zoo hire a trained stuntman to go in there and spar with the animals just to trigger their fighting instincts. 32. You really have to marvel at the sheer audacity of some safety complaints. A deeply concerned mother dragged a park manager all the way to the African savanna exhibit to point out a massive design flaw in the rhinoceros. She felt the giant, pointed horn on the front of the animal's face looked way too intimidating and could accidentally poke someone through the reinforced steel fence. Her completely unhinged solution was to demand the veterinary staff bring out an industrial sander and file the horn down to a smooth, friendly little bump so her toddler would not have nightmares. 33. Sometimes the animals are just way too good at camouflage. An older gentleman left a highly confused complaint at the front gate after visiting the giant tortoise habitat. He admitted he sat on the low retaining wall for 20 minutes, thinking he was just looking at a really nice arrangement of giant decorative boulders. When one of the rocks suddenly sprouted a wrinkled head and slowly walked away, the man nearly had a heart attack. He demanded the zoo paint bright orange safety stripes on the tortoise shells, so nobody else would get jump-scared by a reptile moving at 1 mile per hour. 34. Marine animals do not really care about your incredibly tight vacation schedule. A very impatient woman down at the cephalopod exhibit was completely outraged that the giant Pacific octopus was hiding inside a dark underwater cave. She repeatedly tapped on the glass with her metal keys and then demanded an aquarist come out with a steel crowbar to physically dismantle the carefully constructed rock display. She seriously believed the staff should forcefully evict the highly intelligent creature from its cozy hiding spot just so she could snap a blurry photo for her social media feed. 35. Sometimes nature is a little weird looking, but one guest took it as a personal insult to modern hygiene. During a VIP feeding experience, a woman was absolutely horrified to discover that a giraffe has a massive, dark purple, almost black tongue. She instantly dropped her piece of lettuce and filed a formal health and safety complaint. She claimed the zoo was severely neglecting their dental care and aggressively demanded the keepers start brushing the giraffes' tongues with minty toothpaste so they would look nice and pink like a normal, civilized creature. 36. You would think people know what famous animals look like before paying money to see them, but apparently not. A highly suspicious guy caused a massive scene at the desert habitat because he noticed the Bactrian camels had 2 humps instead of 1. He started shouting to the gathered crowd that the zoo was breeding radioactive mutant animals in a secret underground lab. Even when the tour guide showed him an educational plaque proving that 2-humped camels naturally exist, the guy called it fake news and demanded his money back for being exposed to genetic freaks. 37. How anyone ever discovers this bizarre fact is completely beyond me, but it actually happened. A deeply angry teenager marched up to an aquarium guide to aggressively complain that the water splashing out of the open-top ray touch tank tasted incredibly salty. Yes, this kid literally licked his wet fingers after touching a slimy marine animal and was absolutely shocked to discover that ocean water contains heavy amounts of salt. He left a 0-star review claiming the aquarium was trying to dehydrate their guests on purpose to force them into buying overpriced bottled water at the gift shop. 38. Cartoon logic strikes again, and this time the penguins are the innocent victims of terrible fashion critiques. A wildly disappointed woman completely ruined a guided tour by loudly complaining that the penguins were not actually wearing real tiny bow ties and little black jackets. She completely bought into the old joke that penguins wear tuxedos and thought the zoo was just being incredibly cheap by displaying them completely naked. She actually asked the zoologist if they kept the formal wear in a closet for special holiday events, or if the birds just flat out refused to dress up for regular weekdays. 39. Getting a massive wild predator to pose for a picture is a truly terrible idea, but one tourist completely lacked basic survival instincts. He leaned dangerously over the safety railing at the swamp exhibit and desperately tried to get the massive Nile crocodile to look up and say cheese. When the giant reptile completely ignored him, the guy threw a total adult temper tantrum. He complained to the front office that the animals were deeply uncooperative and seriously suggested the staff should train the man eating monsters to smile and hold perfectly still whenever a camera flashes. 40. Pristine white snow is a complete lie, and so are perfectly clean wild animals. A highly critical neat freak could not handle the fact that the majestic polar bear had slight yellow and brown stains on its fur from rolling around in the natural dirt. She marched right up to customer relations and complained that the zoo was keeping a totally filthy exhibit. Her totally serious solution was to demand the staff tranquilize the 1,000-pound Arctic predator and give it a vigorous scrub down with whitening dog shampoo so it would look fresh and clean for the weekend crowds. 41. You ever look at a snake and think it is just way too sneaky for its own good? A deeply paranoid visitor marched right into the reptile house and aggressively demanded the staff tie tiny little bells to the rattlesnakes. She claimed their silent slithering was a massive public safety hazard and heavily implied the zoo was breeding secret ninja assassins. She actually threatened to report the facility to workplace safety boards if they did not mandate high visibility gear for all venomous reptiles immediately. 42. Real estate critics are absolutely everywhere, even in the middle of nature. A super passive-aggressive woman left a highly detailed scathing note at the guest services desk, complaining about the beaver habitat. She claimed the pile of chewed-up logs and mud looked incredibly trashy and brought down the property value of the entire wildlife park. Acting exactly like a neighborhood homeowner association president, she demanded the beavers be forced to rebuild their dam using proper modern architectural blueprints and a nice coat of exterior paint. 43. Electricity is absolute magic to some uneducated people. Down in the Amazon River tank, a skeptical guy accused the aquarium of running a gigantic financial scam because the electric eel was not shooting visible lightning bolts. He aggressively demanded a brave employee dip a USB cable into the water so he could charge his dying smartphone, just to prove the animal actually carried a current. When told absolutely not, he boldly claimed the eel was just a rubber tube powered by hidden batteries and demanded his entry fee back. 44. Fragile masculinity is a truly wild thing to witness in the animal kingdom. One guy threw an absolute temper tantrum at the African predator exhibit when a tour guide casually mentioned that female spotted hyenas run the pack and are physically larger than the males. He turned bright red, called the entire zoo a bunch of liberal snowflakes, and accused them of forcing woke gender politics onto the local wildlife. He seriously demanded they put a male hyena in charge, just to restore traditional family values. 45. Beauty is totally in the eye of the beholder, but one fiercely angry mom decided to make her personal disgust a legal issue. She furiously demanded a massive trigger warning sign be placed directly outside the nocturnal exhibit because the lemur was simply too ugly to look at. She claimed its giant bulging eyes and creepy long fingers deeply traumatized her innocent child. Her actual totally unhinged solution was that the zoo should permanently hide the poor creature behind a thick velvet curtain until it grew into a more aesthetically pleasing shape. 46. Taking out your family grief on a giant, completely oblivious reptile is definitely a brand new therapy method. An incredibly bitter guest stared at a Galapagos tortoise information plaque and suddenly realized the massive animal was over 100 years old. He instantly stormed over to a zookeeper and started yelling that it was deeply disrespectful for a stupid shelled lizard to outlive his late grandfather. He genuinely expected the zoo management to write him an official apology letter for the severe emotional damage caused by a turtle longevity. 47. Strict rules for public decency apparently apply to semi-aquatic mammals now. A highly conservative patron filed a massive, deeply concerned complaint about the sea otters because they were holding hands while floating on their backs. She called this a completely inappropriate public display of affection and fiercely argued it was actively corrupting the youth. She furiously demanded the aquarium staff jump into the freezing water and physically separate the bonded pair so they would finally learn some proper modesty. 48. Trying to have a completely private domestic dispute near highly intelligent birds is a huge rookie mistake. A fiercely angry couple demanded a manager immediately fire the resident African gray parrot after it perfectly memorized and loudly repeated their vicious screaming match. The husband claimed the mockingbird was invading his privacy and heavily violating federal wiretapping laws. He actually wanted the zoo to medically wipe the parrot's memory, or at least force it to sign a non-disclosure agreement before they drove home. 49. Have you ever felt totally scammed by the concept of natural camouflage? A highly aggressive dad banged his fists on the insect terrarium and screamed that the zoo was literally just charging innocent families to look at a pile of dead twigs. Even as the giant walking stick insects slowly crawled up the glass right in front of his face, he refused to admit defeat. He arrogantly told the entomologist that the bugs were clearly mechanical and fiercely demanded to see the hidden control room where they operated the remote-controlled wood. 50. Empathy is clearly totally dead for some tourists looking for a cheap thrill. An incredibly entitled woman noticed that a rescued sea turtle in the massive ocean tank was missing its back left flipper. Instead of feeling a shred of pity for the brave survivor of a tragic boat strike, she marched straight to the ticket booth and demanded a 25% refund. Her twisted, ice-cold logic was that since she paid to see whole animals, providing a defective sea turtle was a blatant breach of consumer trust. 51. Sustained eye contact can definitely be uncomfortable, but threatening to sue a primate is a whole different level of crazy. A deeply insecure man left a totally unhinged voicemail for the park director claiming the massive silverback gorilla was staring at him judgmentally. He felt the giant ape was mentally undressing his character and making him feel deeply inadequate as a man. He heavily insisted the zoo buy the gorilla a pair of mirrored aviator sunglasses so guests would never have to endure such toxic psychological warfare again. 52. Living right next to a city zoo means you will definitely hear weird animal noises, but one local resident thought she could magically dictate the laws of nature. She sent a highly aggressive, legally certified letter demanding the lion enclosure be placed on a strict quiet hour schedule. Her toddler took a nap every single day at exactly 2 in the afternoon, and the distant roaring was completely unacceptable. She seriously suggested the brave keepers give the lions a giant rubber pacifier, or maybe some warm milk to keep them totally silent. 53. Gravity is apparently just a gentle suggestion to some people. A frantic woman grabbed a security guard in the nocturnal house because she was in an absolute panic over the fruit bats. She pointed wildly at the ceiling, claiming that every single bat had suddenly passed away and was just glued upside down to the branches. When the guard explained that bats naturally sleep hanging by their feet, she refused to listen. She actually demanded the zoo bring in a tall ladder and flip all the bats right side up so the blood would not rush to their tiny heads. 54. Brightly colored things are not always meant for eating, which is a vital life lesson one frantic parent somehow totally missed. She absolutely lost her mind at the Amphibian Conservation Center, loudly claiming the poison dart frogs looked exactly like forbidden gummy candies. She violently argued that displaying brightly colored bite-sized animals was a massive, completely unacceptable choking hazard for hungry toddlers. Her totally rational demand was for the zoo to paint the frogs dull brown, so they would look way less delicious to passing children. 55. Fantasy romance novels have truly warped the minds of grown adults walking among us. A deeply disappointed millennial threw a massive flailing fit in the aquarium gift shop because they did not sell actual, functional, flesh-and-blood mermaid tales. She claimed the marketing brochures heavily promised true ocean magic, and a cheap plastic keychain just was not cutting it. She aggressively demanded the terrified staff take her to the secret back room where they kept the mythical aquatic creatures and let her buy a real tale on the black market. 56. Preserved scientific specimens are a major staple of natural history. But one guy completely missed the concept of formaldehyde jars. He stood right in front of a giant squid suspended in a massive glass cylinder and fiercely complained that the animal was being incredibly lazy. He told the curator he aggressively drove 4 hours through heavy traffic to watch a mythical sea monster playfully wrestle a sperm whale to the death. When he finally learned the squid had been dead for 20 years, he demanded the aquarium hire a necromancer to revive it. 57. Trusting your smartwatch over actual physical reality is a totally modern disease. A sweaty, deeply annoyed marathon runner marched straight into the front office and heavily accused the zoo of faking their park map dimensions. He proudly pointed to his high-tech wristband and loudly declared his step counter hit 10,000 way faster than the paper map suggested. He aggressively demanded the zoo hire professional land surveyors to completely redraw the property lines because his highly specific fitness application was clearly more accurate than a satellite image. 58. Screen time addiction has officially crossed species lines thanks to one highly annoying visitor. A super passive-aggressive tech bro sent a deeply condescending email to the head zoologist stating that the meerkats looked severely understimulated in their dirt enclosure. He felt digging underground tunnels was incredibly outdated and generously offered to donate a waterproof tablet preloaded with hyperactive mobile games. He genuinely believed giving the small mammals an endless scroll of short-form video content would heavily improve their mental health and make them way more relatable to Generation Z. 59. Petting zoos are absolute pure chaos, and one fancy woman learned that the extremely hard way. A highly aggressive, completely fearless little goat boldly snatched the heavily crinkled park map right out of her manicured hand and swallowed it whole. Instead of laughing off the ridiculous situation, she turned beet red and furiously demanded the zoo formally bill the animal for property damage. She insisted the staff deduct exactly $3 from the goat's daily food allowance to completely reimburse her for the stolen paper. 60. Touching unique marine life is supposed to be highly educational, but one beauty influencer found it completely offensive to her daily skincare routine. She quickly pulled her hand out of the shallow stingray touch pool and instantly shrieked that the strange animals were way too slimy. She marched right over to a totally bewildered teenage volunteer and demanded they start applying an oil-free matte moisturizer to the rays every single morning. She deeply felt their natural protective mucus layer was totally ruining her flawless aesthetic hand modeling photos. 61. Hollywood exorcisms belong in scary horror movies, not the peaceful avian sanctuary. A deeply religious patron totally freaked out when a beautiful barn owl smoothly rotated its head 270 degrees to look directly at him. He dropped his expensive ice cream cone on the concrete and loudly accused the innocent bird of being heavily possessed by dark, ancient, evil spirits. He aggressively demanded the zoo immediately hire a local priest to cleanse the entire enclosure and permanently ban the owls from doing any more demonic neck yoga. 62. Toxic diet culture has finally come for the incredibly gentle sea cows. A totally unhinged fitness instructor left a blistering online review claiming the manatee exhibit was heavily promoting chronic obesity to highly impressionable youth. She felt the massive, blubber-filled marine mammals were setting a truly terrible example by just floating around happily eating lettuce all day. She fiercely demanded the aquarium put the 1,000-pound creatures on an incredibly strict keto diet and force them to swim rapid laps until they developed highly visible abdominal muscles. 63. Extreme nationalism gets really incredibly weird when you actively apply it to wild birds. A highly aggressive guy wearing head-to-toe hunting camouflage stood furiously outside the bald eagle enclosure, waiting for a formal military salute. When the majestic bird just sat quietly on a tall branch, totally ignoring him, he loudly accused the eagle of deep treason and hating freedom. He stormed straight up to park security and seriously demanded they loudly play the national anthem on a continuous loop until the bird showed some proper patriotic respect for the American flag. 64. Getting slightly wet at a massive aquarium is usually a funny accident, but one guy treated it exactly like a federal crime. An archerfish, which literally hunts by shooting high-speed streams of water from its mouth, absolutely nailed a highly snooty visitor right in the center of his forehead. The man loudly gasped, wiped his wet brow, and furiously demanded the management staff formally arrest the fish for unprovoked assault and battery. He wanted the tiny aquatic sniper placed in total solitary confinement for permanently damaging his delicate personal dignity. 65. Unregulated capitalism is definitely the real apex predator of the modern animal park. An incredibly cheap dad had an absolute nuclear meltdown at the exit gates because the winding pathway physically forced everyone to walk directly through the massive plush toy emporium. He wildly yelled at the terrified teenage cashier that this highly intentional layout was a literal psychological hostage situation. He aggressively claimed the zoo totally brainwashed his screaming toddler and literally forced him at gunpoint to spend $30 on a stuffed red panda. 66. Taking care of the absolute biggest land mammal on Earth is incredibly messy work, but one intense neat freak was totally disgusted by the process. She watched a massive elephant excitedly pick up a trunk full of loose dirt and joyfully blast it all over its own back to properly cool down. The frantic woman sprinted to the information kiosk and aggressively demanded the zoo immediately ban the wild animals from playing in the dirty mud. She actually suggested the keepers follow the elephants around with a massive industrial vacuum cleaner to keep their thick skin perfectly spotless. 67. Misunderstanding highly basic global geography is a very common theme in these truly bizarre customer complaints. A deeply confused tourist was absolutely furious that the African penguins did not react at all when he aggressively yelled at them in a fake, highly offensive Australian accent. He genuinely believed all penguins naturally lived alongside kangaroos and thought the birds were just being incredibly rude by totally ignoring his terrible impersonation. He filed a formal written complaint stating the zoo desperately needed to hire a specialized translator for their incredibly disrespectful aquatic birds. 68. Bottomless brunch culture makes totally normal people completely lose their minds in public. A highly intoxicated bachelorette party stumbled loudly past the giant flamingo pond and instantly felt deeply personally attacked by the beautiful scenery. The wild maid of honor aggressively banged on the wooden fence and yelled that it was totally unfair the bright pink birds got to stand in shallow water all day long without holding a single tropical cocktail. She actually demanded a manager bring out a silver tray of bottomless mimosas so the flock could properly celebrate her friend's upcoming wedding. 69. Let us finish with the absolute ultimate display of insane human entitlement. An incredibly angry, highly aggressive real estate agent visited the Australian pavilion and was absolutely disgusted by the fluffy koalas peacefully sleeping in the tall eucalyptus trees. She loudly declared to the entire crowd that the lazy bears were completely wasting prime, high-value commercial real estate by sleeping 18 solid hours a day. She aggressively demanded the zoo formally evict the tired marsupials, chop down the ancient trees, and quickly build a luxury boutique coffee shop in their place because the animals were clearly not paying their fair share of monthly rent. Which of these 69 complaints is so mind-numbingly stupid that you absolutely refuse to believe a functioning adult actually said it out loud? Expose their number in the comments right now so we can judge them together. Hit that like button if your brain needs a hard reset after all this nonsense, and subscribe before the next wave of human absurdity drops.